I pay very little attention to the utterances of particularly politicians on social media sites, especially Twitter. I rather listen to what they say in press conferences and on official platforms. But enough of an uproar on the tweets of Helen Zille last week for that to grab my attention. Helen Zille, the DA's chairperson in the Federal Council, voiced her support for a UK Supreme Court ruling that excludes transgendered women from the definition of woman under that country's Equality Act. It was a matter which was taken up by by a group called For Women Scotland, with the support of J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter authoress. And on Twitter, Zille wrote, they have protected the rights of women across the English-speaking world from a contagion as dangerous socially as COVID was medically. We thank you from the southern tip of Africa. And she then also shared various other posts of Rowling and others who celebrated this court ruling. But that statement has prompted a flurry of responses from LGBTQI plus groups, including Access Chapter 2. It's the MPO which promotes human rights and empowerment among women, girls, and LGBTQ plus persons. Steve Letsike is the founder of Access Chapter 2. Steve Letsike is also the Deputy Minister of in the Presidency for Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities. Can we maybe just start off with explaining the UK court ruling first to give us a basis here, Steve? What was that judgment in the UK Supreme Court in response to the Equality Act of 2010? It's not a broad decision which affects all aspects of life when it comes to women and trans women, but for that Equality Act. What did that judgment actually say?
No, thank you. Good morning to you and to the listeners. Indeed, the UK Supreme Court, has, of course, interrogated the definition of women under the Equality Act of 2010. And the judgment itself has defined or, has ruled in terms of the definition of women or what constitute women, for that matter, in the course of definition of biological sex. And I think on its own, under that country's Equality Act, their own expression says it excludes transgender women in that case. So that means, whether it's access to toilets or bathrooms, hospital wards, sports clubs, and many, many other ways in which transgender women has been accessing spaces. And it was defined in terms of biological instead of social construction in the case of classification of women.
There's a movement called TERF, Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminism. It is women who feel opposed to trans women being classified as women. What is your thoughts on this particular movement on which J.K. Rowling is a key figure in?
Look, this movement, and even including J. Rowling in this case, there's always been a kind of dynamics and grapple with what constitutes gender and what constitutes gender justice, for that matter. And I think you find it where cis heterosexual women have always been aggrieved, with the inclusion of transgender women. And I think this then takes us to the grappling of definition of gender. Gender as a social construction that includes expression, that includes identity, that also includes, femininity or masculinity in the case. But I think a lot of people really struggle with that, and even cis heterosexual women struggle with that, no doubt. And that's why in the case where patriarchy takes place, in the case of historic, cultural and societal teaching has actually left a lot of people trying to own and grapple with this issue and exclude others in its definition. And that's the case where we see movements of that nature that really tries to fight for the relevance and survival, even of maintaining those gender dynamics that exist.
You describe Helen Zille's support and taking to a public platform as a senior politician in South Africa, describing her thoughts as hurtful and harmful. How is that so? She is, and she paints herself as a feminist who wants to protect biological women in sport, in spaces that are occupied by women. How is her speech considered hurtful and harmful?
If at all you look at history, in terms of how marginalization, oppressive system, in this case, even in the case of gender exclusionary, and it's not disconnected to other intersectional issues, and in this case, Helen Zille's reckless, view, it's a scapegoating, and she has kept a conservative view, gender, including racism for that matter, and it's the essential base of her comment. And I think her speaking out also has a connotation of a history that South Africa cannot shred itself fully, and that's of imperialist approach. We are not going to be taken back to the colonial era, not by Helen Zille or anybody else. And her view is a reminder that as a South Africa that has always consistently tried to shackle this colonial history of sex, of race, of gender, and many others. And that's why our Constitution, Section 9 of our Constitution, that says no one will be discriminated against any other grounds, including gender, including race, and many others. And we are a country that must consistently be demonstrating and putting out the rule of law, and that also respects the diversity of our people. And Helen Zille has undermined that.
But it
view.
is a dynamic conversation. It's a dynamic conversation when it comes to equal footing in sports competition. It's a dynamic conversation, and who gets included, who is not included in women's only spaces. What particular point of Helen Zille's comments or retweeting on people's support for this UK court judgment harms transgendered people in South Africa?
I doubt that you would assume that what Helen Zille says it's not considered. We are dealing with a lot of things. Take, for instance, we have been battling internationally with the issue and the case of Caster Semenya. And even if it's not in relation to transgender, but the kind of exposure and violation and harm that brings the fact that constantly a woman has to be subjected to tests. And that's constantly what we have to deal with. The second one, which was a recent case in the Olympics that were held last year, no doubt, the similarly issues of that nature that always interrogates the bodily autonomy and the integrity even of transgender people. So for you to think that Helen Zille's words don't cause harm, it actually, yes, perpetuate the very same cycle of oppression and exclusion. And that is a lived experience for many transgender people in our country. It's actually disgusting to even consider that the words will not necessarily bring harm. They will bring harm.
Steve Letsike, really appreciate your time. Founder of Access Chapter 2, also, in fact, the Deputy Minister in the Presidency of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability. We have requested an interview with Helen Zille. We have not received any word back from her, and if she does, then we'll bring her on air as well.